Mafia boss's son spat at all the nannies, but kissed this maid. New Orleans shimmered under the glow of streetlights as rain pounded against the windows of the Grand Garden District mansion, masking the sound of a baby's relentless cries that had lasted for hours without relief. Charles Blackburn stood in the shadowed doorway of his son's nursery, his powerful frame slumped with exhaustion as he watched yet another qualified nanny pack her belongings, tears streaming down her face. The woman's hands trembled as she fumbled with her suitcase clasps, muttering about devil children and impossible situations, while avoiding his cold, calculating stare. "That's the 5th one this month," whispered Gerald, Charles's most trusted advisor, his voice barely audible over the howling of both the storm outside and the inconsolable 18-month-old inside. "The other families are beginning to talk, boss. They say your son's behavior is a sign of weakness in your household." Charles's jaw clenched at the mention of potential weakness, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the doorframe, memories of his late wife's final moments flashing unbidden through his mind. She had died bringing their son into this world, leaving Charles with a legacy he couldn't control, and a void that grew wider with each passing day. Little Andrew's screams intensified, his small face red with exertion as he threw another stuffed animal against the wall with surprising strength for a toddler. No amount of expensive toys, expert childcare, or Charles's awkward attempts at comfort seemed to soothe the rage that burned within his son's tiny body. Outside the mansion gates, a young woman hurried through the rain, clutching a worn newspaper advertisement for a cleaning position at the notorious Blackburn estate. Her worn shoes splashed through puddles as she rehearsed her introduction, desperate for any job that would help pay for her grandmother's mounting medical bills. Dawn broke through heavy clouds as Charlotte stepped into the imposing foyer, her humble clothes still damp from the storm, as a stern-faced housekeeper listed her cleaning duties. The marble floors echoed with her footsteps as she followed instructions, completely unaware that her life was about to change forever. "Stay away from the West Wing," the housekeeper warned, her voice dropping to a whisper as distant wailing reached their ears. "That's where Mr. Blackburn's son stays, and he's already driven away every nanny in the parish. Not your concern. You're just here to clean." Charlotte nodded obediently, but found herself drawn toward the cries as she dusted the hallway later that morning, her heart aching at the sound of such raw distress. She paused outside the nursery door, momentarily forgetting her place as her hand reached for the ornate handle, turning it before she could reconsider. The nursery fell suddenly silent as she entered, causing Charlotte to freeze in place as a pair of startlingly blue eyes, identical to those she'd glimpsed in Mr. Blackburn's portrait downstairs, locked onto hers from a luxurious crib. Andrew's tear-stained face registered something akin to curiosity as he studied this new stranger in his domain. "I'm sorry, little one," Charlotte whispered, knowing she should leave immediately but unable to turn away from the child's intense gaze. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right. Those were some mighty big cries for such a small person." Without thinking, Charlotte hummed a soft melody her grandmother had taught her, a Creole lullaby that had soothed her own childhood fears. To her astonishment, Andrew's rigid posture relaxed slightly, his tiny fingers unclenching from the bars of his crib as the gentle notes washed over him. Charles Blackburn stood transfixed in the doorway, having rushed upstairs at the sudden silence that had fallen over his usually chaotic household. His dark eyes widened in disbelief as he witnessed his son reaching out toward the cleaning girl, a small smile transforming the boy's usually scowling face. "Who are you, and what are you doing in this room?" Charles demanded, his voice carrying the authority that made grown men tremble in the underbelly of New Orleans. Yet beneath the harshness lay a desperate note of hope that only a father at his wits' end could understand. Charlotte spun around, nearly knocking over an antique lamp as she stammered apologies, explaining her position as the new cleaning staff and how the baby's cries had drawn her in. As she spoke, little Andrew let out a soft coo, crawling to the edge of his crib, with arms outstretched toward this strange new person who had somehow broken through his fortress of misery. "He's never done that before," Charles murmured, watching in astonishment as his son reached eagerly for the young woman. Charlotte stood frozen, torn between fear of punishment for overstepping and the undeniable pull of the child's silent plea for comfort. With a cautious glance at Charles, Charlotte approached the crib and gently lifted Andrew into her arms, holding her breath as she waited for the inevitable screams. Instead, the toddler nestled against her shoulder, his small fingers curling into her simple cotton dress as he released a contented sigh. "What's your name?" Charles asked, his voice softer now as he watched his son's eyelids grow heavy. with the first signs of peaceful sleep. The sight stirred something within him, a forgotten hope that perhaps his broken family wasn't beyond saving after all. "Charlotte Davis, sir," she answered quietly, still swaying gently with the now drowsy child. "My grandmother raised me on those old Creole lullabies. They always seemed to have a special kind of magic for soothing troubled hearts." Charles moved closer, studying this ordinary girl who had accomplished in minutes what specialists and nannies had failed to do for months. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance, no fancy education or impressive credentials, yet his son had chosen her above all others. "I'm offering you a new position, Miss Davis," Charles stated, his tone making it clear this was not a request, but a decision already made. "Double your current salary to become Andrew's caretaker, starting immediately." Charlotte's heart raced at the unexpected opportunity, thoughts of her grandmother's costly heart medication and their nearly empty pantry flashing through her mind. Yet beneath her practical considerations lay a genuine connection to the child, now sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I don't have any formal training with children," Charlotte admitted, gently stroking Andrew's soft curls as he sighed in his sleep. "Though my grandmother always said some people are born with a natural gift for understanding what little ones need when they can't find the words themselves." The morning light streamed through parted curtains as Charles observed this strange tableau, his fearsome reputation temporarily forgotten as he witnessed his son's first peaceful moments since birth. His business associates would never believe the notorious Charles Blackburn could be rendered speechless by something so simple as a sleeping child. A subtle change transformed Charles's usually intimidating presence as he stepped forward to brush a gentle finger across his son's cheek. "Whatever magic you possess, Miss Davis, I'm willing to pay handsomely for it, provided you understand that accepting this position means absolute loyalty to this household." The unspoken implications hung heavy in the air between them, a reminder of exactly who Charles Blackburn was, and the dangerous world he commanded beyond these nursery walls. Charlotte knew the rumors, everyone in New Orleans did, about his business dealings and the power he wielded with ruthless precision. Gerald appeared at the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to calculated assessment as he took in the scene before him. "Boss, the gentlemen from the harbor have arrived for your meeting," he announced, his gaze lingering curiously on Charlotte and the sleeping child. "Tell them to wait," Charles replied without taking his eyes off his son, a decision that would have been unthinkable mere hours ago. "Miss Davis and I need to discuss the terms of her new employment as Andrew's nanny. This takes precedence." Charlotte felt the weight of her decision as she followed Charles to his study, still cradling the sleeping toddler against her chest. The ornate room with its leather-bound books and subtle hints of dangerous business ventures painted a stark contrast to her humble upbringing and simple values. "There's something you should know," Charlotte said softly as she settled into a chair across from the imposing desk. "I care for my grandmother who suffers from hypertension. I'll need to make arrangements for her care if I'm to live here." Charles nodded thoughtfully, tapping his fingers against the polished mahogany desk as he considered her words. "Your grandmother can move into the carriage house at the edge of the property, close enough for you to visit, yet separate from the main household affairs." Relief flooded Charlotte's face, quickly replaced by wariness, as she realized how easily this powerful man could rearrange lives to suit his purposes. She wondered what invisible strings might be attached to such generosity, even as Andrew snuggled closer in his sleep. "Why does he respond to me?" Charlotte whispered, voicing the question that hung between them. "Surely you've had qualified nannies with years of experience trying to connect with him." A shadow passed across Charles's face as he rose from his desk, moving to a cabinet where he extracted a silver-framed photograph hidden behind stacks of documents. "His mother had the same gift for Creole lullabies," he said quietly, placing the frame before Charlotte to reveal a beautiful woman with Andrew's eyes. Charlotte gasped softly at the resemblance between mother and child, understanding blooming as Charles continued in a voice rarely heard outside these private walls. "Marie was from the 9th Ward. We met when I was handling business there. Fell in love despite the complications it caused in my world." The photograph captured a laughing woman in a garden, her hands resting protectively over a pregnant belly, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that would soon claim her life. Charlotte felt the weight of this shared grief as Andrew stirred slightly in his sleep, his small hand reaching up to touch her cheek. "The pregnancy was difficult from the start," Charles continued, turning to gaze out the window at the garden his wife had once tended. "Complications during delivery took her from us. Sometimes I think Andrew somehow knows, feels the loss even without understanding it." Outside the study window, rain began to fall again, gentle drops that traced patterns down the glass like tears too long held back. Charlotte rocked Andrew gently, humming the lullaby once more, as she observed the tension in Charles' shoulders, the grief he kept locked away from his dangerous world. "Children understand more than we give them credit for," Charlotte offered softly, years of helping her grandmother raise neighborhood children informing her words. "Perhaps he's not angry, just lost and looking for someone who reminds him of what he's missing." Charles turned, studying Charlotte with new intensity, as thunder rumbled in the distance. "You remind me of her, not in appearance, but in spirit," he admitted, vulnerability showing through the cracks of his carefully maintained facade. "That kindness is rare in my world." A knock at the door broke the moment, Gerald appearing with an apologetic but insistent expression. "The harbor matter can't wait any longer, boss," he stated firmly, his eyes conveying the urgency that Charlotte could not understand but Charles immediately recognized. "We'll continue this discussion later," Charles told Charlotte, his business mask sliding back into place as he straightened his tie. "Gerald will show you to the nursery suite. Consider it yours now, as Andrew clearly won't tolerate being separated from you." Charlotte watched him transform before her eyes, the grieving widower vanishing beneath the calculated exterior of a man who controlled half the city's underworld. She wondered which version was the real Charles Blackburn, and whether either could be trusted with her future. 3 months passed with remarkable transformation in the Blackburn household, Andrew's tantrums giving way to giggles and babbling attempts at words. Charlotte had settled into a routine of morning walks through the garden, afternoon naps, and evenings spent teaching Charles how to connect with his son. Charlotte's grandmother, Mrs. Davis, had moved into the carriage house as promised, her wise presence a calming influence during weekend family dinners that had somehow become a tradition. Her health had improved with proper medication and less stress, her sharp eyes missing nothing as she observed the growing connection between her granddaughter and the formidable Mafia boss. "He looks at you the way the moon gazes at the stars," Mrs. Davis commented one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Charles push Andrew on a newly installed garden swing. "Be careful, child. Men with power see the world differently than we do." Charlotte dismissed her grandmother's concerns with a gentle laugh, though her heart fluttered traitorously whenever Charles entered a room. She told herself her feelings were merely gratitude for his generosity, for the security he provided, for the way he was slowly learning to be a father. Late one night, as Charlotte tiptoed from Andrew's room after settling him with a story, she noticed a sliver of light beneath Charles' study door, and muffled voices raised in urgent discussion. Against her better judgment, she paused, the unmistakable tension in Charles's tone holding her in place. "The Calloway family is making moves along the riverfront," a gruff voice stated, one Charlotte recognized as belonging to Hector, Charles's security chief. "They're saying the Blackburn operation has gone soft since you've been playing house with the nanny and your kid." Charles's response came as a low growl, a reminder of the dangerous man who existed beneath the increasingly gentle father Charlotte had come to know. "Anyone who mistakes my family priorities for weakness will regret that miscalculation very quickly," he replied, ice-coating each syllable. The word family echoed in Charlotte's mind as she hurried back to her room, conflicting emotions swirling through her chest. She had never deluded herself about Charles's business dealings, yet somehow the reality of his world had remained at a comfortable distance, until now. Morning arrived with unexpected visitors, 2 men in expensive suits who eyed Charlotte with open curiosity as she entered the dining room with Andrew perched on her hip. Their conversation with Charles halted abruptly, leaving an uncomfortable silence broken only by Andrew's cheerful babbling. "Miss Davis, please take Andrew to the garden," Charles requested, his tone pleasant, but eyes conveying a clear message that she should leave immediately. The stranger's calculating stares followed her retreat, sending shivers down her spine despite the warm summer morning. Later that afternoon, while Andrew napped, Charlotte found herself drawn to Charles's study, seeking answers to questions she wasn't sure she should ask. The room stood empty, but a folder lay open on the desk, photographs spilling across the polished surface. Surveillance images of her and Andrew in the park, at the local market, outside her grandmother's church. Her hands trembled as she examined the images, each one dated and annotated with comments about their routine, their vulnerabilities, their patterns of movement. A handwritten note in unfamiliar script at the bottom of one photo read, "The Blackburn heir and his caretaker. Perfect leverage." Charlotte sank into Charles's chair, the world tilting beneath her as she finally confronted the danger she had invited into her life, and worse, into her grandmother's and Andrew's. The protective bubble of domestic bliss she had been living in shattered, revealing the harsh reality she had chosen to ignore. The study door opened suddenly, Charles freezing in the doorway as he took in the scene before him. Charlotte surrounded by the surveillance photos, her face pale with the knowledge of threats she had never been meant to discover. "You weren't supposed to see those," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. "Are we in danger?" Charlotte asked directly, finding courage in her concern for Andrew and her grandmother. "Is someone targeting your son because of your business activities? Because of me?" Charles crossed the room slowly, gathering the photographs with practiced calm that did nothing to mask the tension radiating from his powerful frame. "The Calloway family is attempting to expand their territory. They see my attention to Andrew as a distraction they can exploit," he explained, his voice measured. "And they're right, aren't they?" Charlotte pressed, rising from the chair to stand her ground. "You've been spending mornings teaching your son to build block towers instead of managing your business interests. That makes us targets." Outside the window, the garden where they had spent countless peaceful hours now seemed exposed and vulnerable, the high walls surrounding the property suddenly inadequate protection. Charles followed her gaze, understanding blooming in his expression as he witnessed her fear for the first time. "I have men watching the property, the carriage house, the routes you take to the park. Nothing will happen to you, to Andrew, or to your grandmother," Charles assured her, reaching for her hand with uncharacteristic gentleness. "You have my word, Charlotte." Something in the way he spoke her name, not Miss Davis, but Charlotte, sent warmth cascading through her chest despite the circumstances. She found herself stepping closer, drawn by the protective intensity in his eyes that went beyond employer concern or gratitude for Andrew's care. "We should celebrate Andrew's birthday next week," Charlotte suggested, surprising herself with the change of subject. "He's made so much progress. Smiling, speaking a few words, connecting with you, those achievements deserve recognition, regardless of outside threats." Charles studied her face, clearly weighing her reaction against his expectations, before a rare smile transformed his usually severe features. "A small gathering in the garden. Just us, your grandmother, Gerald, and a few trusted associates who've been asking to meet the boy who's changed the notorious Charles Blackburn." The day of the celebration arrived with perfect weather, golden sunlight filtering through oak branches, as Charles proudly introduced his son to his inner circle. Andrew, dressed in a miniature suit that matched his father's, charmed everyone with his newfound confidence and joyful laughter. Charlotte watched from the refreshment table, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the expensive attire of Charles's associates' wives, who regarded her with thinly veiled curiosity. She felt the weight of their assessment, the unspoken questions about her role in this household and this man's life. Mrs. Davis approached, patting Charlotte's hand knowingly as she followed her granddaughter's gaze to where Charles stood. Andrew balanced on his shoulders as he pointed out butterflies dancing among the roses. "That man may run half this city's shadows, but he looks at you like you hang the stars, child." As twilight descended, fairy lights illuminated the garden, casting a magical glow over the remaining guests who lingered over cake and conversation. Charlotte slipped away to put an overtired Andrew to bed, singing softly as his eyelids fluttered closed, his small hand clutching her finger even in sleep. She sensed Charles before she saw him, his presence filling the nursery doorway, as he watched his son drift into peaceful dreams. "You've given him something I couldn't," he admitted quietly, stepping into the room to stand beside her. Security beyond armed guards, the kind that comes from feeling truly loved. The space between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings as Charles reached out, his fingers brushing a stray curl from Charlotte's cheek with unexpected tenderness. "And perhaps you've given me something similar," he whispered, his usual commanding presence softened in the nursery's gentle glow. "Mr. Blackburn, a moment of your time," Gerald interrupted from the hallway, his expression conveying urgency that could not be ignored. Charles's hand fell away from Charlotte's face. The magical moment shattered as reality intruded once again. Charlotte remained by Andrew's crib, listening to the muffled conversation that drifted through the partially open door. Words like territory dispute, direct challenge, and immediate response required, sending ice through her veins. The contrast between the tender father of moments ago and the business being discussed made her heart ache with impossible choices. Dawn broke with commotion at the front gates, security personnel radioing frantically as a sleek black car parked just outside the property. Charlotte watched from Andrew's window as Charles strode across the lawn to meet 3 men in expensive suits, their body language conveying challenge rather than respect. Andrew sensed the tension, clinging to Charlotte's neck as she tried to distract him with breakfast and toys, all the while straining to understand the raised voices from the garden below. Glass shattered somewhere in the house, followed by hurried footsteps, and the unmistakable sound of Charles barking orders to his security team. Gerald appeared at the nursery door, his normally composed face lined with concern as he gestured for Charlotte to follow. "Mr. Blackburn wants you and Andrew in the safe room immediately. Don't stop for anything. Just come now," he instructed, already reaching for the child. Deep beneath the mansion, past hidden panels and reinforced doors, Charlotte found herself in a surprisingly comfortable apartment, stocked with supplies and equipped with surveillance monitors showing every angle of the property. Andrew explored the new space with curious delight, unaware of the danger that had prompted their hasty relocation. "The Calloway family has made their move," Charles explained hours later as he joined them, his knuckles bruised and a fresh cut above his eye betraying the confrontation that had occurred. "They've demanded territory concessions and offered an alternative arrangement that I've refused to consider." Charlotte settled Andrew with blocks in the corner before turning back to Charles, her heart racing at the barely controlled fury in his expression. "What alternative arrangement?" she asked, though something in his eyes told her she already knew the answer to her question. Charles paced the confined space like a caged predator, power radiating from his tense shoulders as he struggled to maintain control. "They suggested a traditional alliance, a marriage between our families that would end the territory dispute and unite our operations under shared leadership." The implications hung heavy in the air between them, Charlotte's mind racing to understand the politics of a world so foreign to her own upbringing. "And you refused because," she prompted, her voice barely above a whisper, as Andrew happily stacked blocks, oblivious to the adult conversation. "Because I don't make decisions based on threats," Charles snapped, his temper flaring briefly before he regained control, softening as he noticed Andrew's startled expression at his raised voice. "And because there's only one woman I would consider bringing permanently into this household, into my son's life." Charlotte's breath caught as Charles crossed the room to stand before her, his expression transformed by vulnerability she had glimpsed only in rare, unguarded moments. "The Calloways have given me 24 hours to reconsider their offer before they escalate this conflict," he continued, taking her hands in his. "I need you to take Andrew and your grandmother to my property in the countryside until this situation is resolved," Charles instructed, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I can't focus on eliminating this threat if I'm worried about your safety here in the city." Charlotte pulled her hands away, surprising herself with the strength of her resistance. "Running away solves nothing," she argued, years of watching her grandmother stand firm through hardship, fueling her courage. "Andrew needs stability, not another disruption to his finally peaceful life." "This isn't a negotiation, Charlotte," Charles countered, authority creeping back into his tone as he straightened to his full height. "The arrangements have already been made. You'll leave tonight under cover of darkness with my most trusted security detail." A memory flashed through Charlotte's mind, her grandmother's words about men of power seeing the world differently, as she recognized the impossible position in which she now stood. "And what happens when this conflict is resolved?" she asked quietly. "Will there not simply be another family, another threat, another reason to hide?" Charles fell silent, the truth of her words striking a chord he couldn't easily dismiss. Outside their safe room, his empire teetered on the edge of war, while inside, a simple nanny questioned the foundations of the life he had built with such calculated precision and ruthless determination. "Give me until morning," Charlotte requested, gesturing toward Andrew who had fallen asleep amid his blocks. "Let me think about what's best for him, for my grandmother, and then I'll tell you my decision." Night descended on the safe room, Andrew sleeping peacefully in a makeshift bed while Charlotte sat beside him, watching the rise and fall of his little chest. On the monitors, she could see Charles in his study, surrounded by his lieutenants as they planned strategies she didn't want to understand, for battles she wished weren't necessary. Morning arrived with Charlotte's decision already formed in her heart, though she knew it would not be easily accepted. She found Charles in his study, dark circles beneath his eyes, evidence of a sleepless night spent securing his business interests while his personal world hung in uncertain balance. "I won't run," Charlotte stated simply, standing tall despite the intimidating surroundings of Charles' power center. "Andrew deserves stability, and I refuse to teach him that fleeing is the answer to life's challenges. That's not the man I want him to become." Charles's expression darkened, hands braced against his desk as he processed her defiance. "This isn't about teaching life lessons, Charlotte. This is about survival." he growled, frustration evident in the tense line of his shoulders. "The Callaways won't hesitate to use you and Andrew to hurt me." Before Charlotte could respond, Mrs. Davis entered the study without knocking, her dignified presence commanding attention despite her small stature. "My granddaughter has always been stubborn when she believes she's right," she commented, moving to stand beside Charlotte with quiet solidarity. "Mrs. Davis, with all due respect, you don't understand the danger," Charles began, only to be silenced by the elderly woman's raised hand, and knowing smile that suggested she understood far more than he realized. "I was married to a man who worked the docks when the Irish and Italian families were carving up this city," she revealed, surprising both Charlotte and Charles with this glimpse into her past. "I know exactly what kind of danger follows men in your position, Mr. Blackburn." The revelation hung in the air as Charlotte processed this unknown chapter of her grandmother's history, the unspoken reason behind her cautionary words about powerful men. "Grandmother, you never told me," she whispered, understanding blooming about her grandmother's fierce protectiveness. "Some stories wait for the right time to be told," Mrs. Davis replied, her weathered hand reaching for Charlotte's. "My Jonah chose family over power when faced with a similar choice. That decision gave us 30 beautiful years together instead of a life looking over our shoulders." Charles watched the exchange with calculating eyes that gradually softened as comprehension dawned. "You're suggesting I have a choice beyond fighting or running," he stated. Not a question, but a realization that seemed to shift something fundamental in his demeanor. "Every man has choices, Mr. Blackburn. Even men who've convinced themselves the path of power is the only road available," Mrs. Davis confirmed, moving to the window to gaze at Andrew playing in the garden below, protected by armed guards who maintained a careful perimeter. "The question is what you value most." The security phone buzzed, interrupting the moment with news that representatives from the Callaway family had arrived at the property gates, demanding an audience to hear Charles's response to their ultimatum. The 24 hours had elapsed, forcing a decision that would reshape all their lives. "Take Andrew to his room," Charles instructed Charlotte, his voice calm despite the storm gathering in his eyes. "I'll handle this conversation, and then we'll discuss our next steps. All of us together, as a family should." The word family resonated through Charlotte's heart as she gathered Andrew from the garden, the child clinging to her with unusual quietness, as if sensing the tension surrounding them. Through the nursery window, she watched Charles stride across the lawn to meet the waiting delegation, his posture betraying nothing of his inner conflict. Hours passed with Charlotte and Mrs. Davis confined to the nursery suite, the house eerily quiet save for occasional muffled voices from downstairs. Andrew grew restless, refusing his lunch and crying for Papa, with heart-wrenching insistence that tested Charlotte's composure as she fought her own rising anxiety. Finally, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the room, the nursery door opened to reveal Gerald, his expression unreadable as he delivered Charles's message. "The boss requests your presence in the garden, Miss Davis. Alone, without Andrew or Mrs. Davis." The garden blazed with golden light as Charlotte made her way down the stone path, her heart pounding against her ribs with each step toward the gazebo where Charles waited. Gone were the Callaway representatives, the armed guards now positioned discreetly along the property perimeter rather than aggressively visible as before. Charles stood with his back to her, his silhouette sharp against the setting sun, as he gazed out toward the Mississippi River visible beyond the garden walls. Something in his posture suggested a man who had made peace with a difficult decision, the usual tension in his shoulders replaced by quiet resolve. "The Callaways have agreed to a truce," Charles stated without turning, his voice carrying on the evening breeze. "No territory exchanges, no marriage alliances, no further threats against this household or anyone in it." Charlotte approached cautiously, relief battling with suspicion at this too-perfect resolution. "What did it cost you?" she asked, knowing enough about Charles's world to understand that such concessions never came without significant sacrifice. When Charles finally turned to face her, Charlotte gasped at the transformation in his expression. Gone was the calculating crime boss, replaced by a man whose eyes held something resembling peace. "Everything," he answered simply, his hands reaching for hers with newfound gentleness. "I've dissolved my operations along the riverfront, surrendered control of the shipping interests, and withdrawn from the territories the Callaways sought," Charles explained, his thumb tracing patterns against her palm as he spoke. "By morning, the Blackburn crime family will exist only in New Orleans legend." Disbelief colored Charlotte's features as she processed his words, understanding the magnitude of what he had sacrificed. power built over generations, wealth accumulated through both legitimate and shadowy means, an identity that had defined him since boyhood. "Why would you give up your empire?" she whispered. Charles' gaze drifted toward the house where Andrew could be seen pressing his face against the nursery window, tiny hands waving excitedly at the sight of his father and Charlotte together in the garden below. "Because some treasures are worth more than power," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. "The legitimate businesses will continue. The shipping company, the real estate holdings, the nightclubs, providing more than enough to support us comfortably," Charles continued, a hint of his business acumen showing through as he outlined this new future. "But the other activities end today." Charlotte struggled to process this seismic shift. Years of warnings about men like Charles Blackburn, colliding with the transformation unfolding before her eyes. "Your associates agreed to this?" she questioned, knowing the dangerous men who had sat at his table would not easily relinquish their power and profit. "Some will follow Gerald to the Callaway organization, some will establish their own operations, and some—" Charles paused, a flash of the dangerous man he had been crossing his features momentarily. "Some required more persuasive methods to accept this new reality." The unspoken violence behind his words reminded Charlotte that despite his choice, Charles remained a man capable of ruthless action when necessary, a complexity she would need to accept if she chose to remain in his world. "And what happens to us now?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than business arrangements. Charles led her deeper into the garden, to a secluded bench beneath a canopy of wisteria where they had spent countless evenings watching Andrew play. "That depends entirely on you, Charlotte," he said, lowering himself to one knee in a gesture that stole her breath. From his pocket, Charles withdrew not an ostentatious diamond, as might be expected from a man of his wealth, but a simple band of twisted gold holding a small pearl, delicate, unique, and somehow perfectly suited to the woman he addressed. "I'm asking you to help me build something better than what I'm leaving behind." Charlotte's hands trembled as Charles continued. His usually commanding voice softened with vulnerability she had glimpsed only in rare, unguarded moments with Andrew. "I'm asking you to be my wife, Andrew's mother, and the heart of a family built on something stronger than fear or power." 3 months later, the Blackburn mansion hummed with activity as caterers arranged flowers and musicians tuned instruments in the garden where Charles and Charlotte would exchange vows at sunset. The transformation of the property matched the change in its owner. Security remained, but the oppressive atmosphere of danger had lifted like morning fog from the Mississippi. Andrew toddled through the garden in his miniature suit, practiced at carrying the small pillow that would bear their rings during the ceremony. At nearly 2 years old, his vocabulary had blossomed under Charlotte's constant care. His favorite phrase now a delighted our family, that never failed to bring tears to Charles's eyes. Mrs. Davis supervised the preparation of traditional New Orleans cuisine for the reception, her health flourishing in the months since the confrontation with the Callaways. She had moved from the carriage house into the east wing of the mansion at Charles's insistence, her wisdom becoming the foundation upon which this new family built their daily life. Charlotte stood before her bedroom mirror, fingertips tracing the delicate lace of her grandmother's restored wedding dress, as she contemplated the journey that had brought her to this day. From desperate job seeker, to nanny, to bride, a path she could never have imagined when she first passed through the mansion gates in the rain. "Having second thoughts?" Charles asked from the doorway, breaking tradition to see his bride before the ceremony. His reformed business practices had softened the hard edges of his personality, though Charlotte had come to appreciate the strength that remained, now directed toward protecting their family through legitimate means. Charlotte turned, heart swelling at the sight of him watching her with unconcealed adoration. "Only thoughts about how fortunate Andrew is to have a father brave enough to choose love over power," she answered, crossing the room to straighten his tie with familiar tenderness. The garden filled with an unusual assortment of guests, former business associates who had chosen to follow Charles into legitimate enterprise, Charlotte's friends from her grandmother's church, influential New Orleans families curious about the reformed crime boss, and even a cautious delegation from the Callaway family, honoring the peace agreement with their presence. Gerald stood as Charles's best man, his loyalty having extended to following his boss into legitimate business, despite lucrative offers from competing organizations. He watched with uncharacteristic emotion as Andrew practiced walking down the aisle, the little boy who had inadvertently changed the course of New Orleans underworld history. "Are you ready to make honest people of us all?" Charles whispered against Charlotte's ear as they prepared to enter the garden, his hand warm and steady against the small of her back. The double meaning wasn't lost on either of them, his journey to legitimacy paralleling their path to becoming a true family. As the music began, and guests rose to their feet, Charlotte took her first step toward a future built on choices rather than circumstances, a deliberate life constructed from love rather than necessity. The setting sun painted the garden in shades of amber and gold, nature itself seeming to bless this unlikely union. Charles waited beneath an arch of white roses, his expression transforming with wonder as Charlotte approached on her grandmother's arm. Andrew broke protocol to run to them halfway down the aisle, tiny hands reaching up until Charles lifted him to complete their journey together, father, son, and bride approaching their future as one. "I never believed in second chances," Charles spoke softly as they exchanged vows beneath the New Orleans sky, his voice carrying to those gathered closest to them, until a simple lullaby and a woman brave enough to see beyond my reputation showed me that even the darkest paths can lead to light. The gathered guests watched in respectful silence, many of them witnesses to Charles's former life of intimidation and power, now seeing him transformed by love. Even the Callaway representatives exchanged meaningful glances, perhaps wondering if their own futures might hold possibilities beyond the endless cycle of territorial disputes and violence. A flock of white doves released at that moment circled overhead, their wings catching the last golden rays of sunset, a surprise arranged by Mrs. Davis, as a symbol of the peace that had finally settled over their lives. Andrew pointed skyward with delighted laughter, his innocent joy a reminder of why Charles had chosen this new path when standing at the crossroads of power and love. Charlotte's voice remained steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes, as she promised to stand beside him through whatever challenges their future might hold. "Not as the man you were, nor the man others expected you to be, but as the father and partner you choose to become each day," she vowed, her words an acknowledgement of the transformation they had witnessed in each other. Their first dance as husband and wife drew applause from even the most skeptical guests, Charles moving with unexpected grace as he held Charlotte close, whispering promises against her hair, while Andrew clapped delightedly from his grandmother's arms. The boy who once rejected everyone, now surrounded by a family created through choice rather than blood. As evening deepened into night, lanterns illuminated the celebration that continued long after Andrew had fallen asleep in his grandfather Gerald's arms, a symbol of trust that would have been unimaginable months before. Charlotte found Charles at the garden's edge, gazing toward the city lights with a contemplative expression that drew her to his side. "Any regrets about leaving your empire behind?" Charlotte asked, genuine curiosity in her voice as she slipped her hand into his, the gold band on her finger catching the moonlight. His answer came without hesitation, his arm drawing her close against the evening chill. "How could I regret trading fear for this?" Charles replied, gesturing toward their home where Andrew slept peacefully, where Mrs. Davis had found renewed purpose, where their future stretched before them unburdened by the shadows of his past. Some empires are built on power, but the strongest are built on love. Thank you all for following this story. If you're enjoying it, write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, as your support is important for me to continue here.
И этому человеку нужны, по сути, и дав ему, вот тут интересно, и дав ему в моменте огромное количество денег, останется ли он таким же? Либо это все поменяет его. Или у бедного, к примеру, или у богатого, забери все деньги, сможет ли он найти себе друзей, там, хорошую жену, стать там, не знаю, хорошим отцом? Ну, вот такие вот интересные вопросы на самом деле. И, наверное, вот для бедных людей тоже, как бедных, я имею в виду финансово, которые, зависимые финансово сильно. Богатые — это независимые финансово. Да, им пофигу вообще, там, что сколько стоит, не считают ни копейки. И вот бедный человек, что может держать его в морально нормальном состоянии? Это, наверное, возможно, поддержка семьи, поддержка друзей. Ну, как я и говорил, к примеру, как у меня есть сосед, вот у него есть поддержка родителей, да, поддержка друзей. но он не вылазит из ситуации, в той, в которую залез. И получается, что у нас получается? Что это тоже не важно, что даже имея поддержку своих родственников, друзей, ты не вылезешь из дизморали, из такого образа жизни. Получается, нет. Так что же тогда? Алло. Алло.
Ты еще не заезжал?
Вот я еду, сейчас заеду скоро.
Не едь туда, все, оплата пришла.
Все, хорошо, давай. Вот, как я и говорю, можно... Так что же для человека самое главное получается? Чтобы держаться на плаву. Многих же не останавливают, дети не останавливают, да, которые имеются. Да, любовь к детям тоже их не останавливает. Да, как-то поддержка, наверное, вот если так разобраться, наверное, самое внутреннее, наверное, если вот так вот разобраться, прямо углубиться, возможно, поддержка жены, типа, или девушки, если прям вот глубоко внутрь копнуть, тоже на самом деле не всегда. Но если у тебя есть девушка и жена, ты на ежедневной основе с ней общаешься, с ней видишься. Ты единственный человек, по сути, да, который, наверное, важен в твоей жизни, который может дать дельный типа совет. И почему же тогда люди, наверное, разводятся, расходятся, разъезжаются, перестают быть вместе, раз это так важно? Наверное, из-за того, что вот нету вот этого как раз таки, наверное, какого-то отдельного совета, какой-то внутреннего чувства нужности этому человеку. Да, люди расходятся, потому что ты не получаешь каких-то тех чувств, которых ты нигде не больше не получишь. Не можешь получить. Ни за деньги, ни еще как-либо. И когда у тебя, наверное, нету этого чувства внутреннего, люди, наверное, потом расходятся. И потом люди, многие, наверное, попадают вот в эти депрессии. Помимо финансовых проблем, нереализованности, да, и еще семейные неудачи какие-то добавляются. Наверное, это было всегда у людей. Просто раньше, наверное, этому не придавали такой огласки, возможно. Да и раньше было чуть, наверное, возможно, проще. Я говорю, человеку надо было всего лишь выполнять свои функции какие-то. Да? Как бы человек мог сходить там, отработать, к примеру, на заводе, прийти, и он был спокоен уже. Что все, типа, он сделал все, что от него требуется. В наше же время ты этого не можешь сделать. И получается, помимо того, что ну вот оно от этого-то и все исходит на самом деле. Семьи от этого-то и рушатся. Да, от того, что когда ты понимаешь о том, что твоя нереализация в жизни, понятно, что это твоя вина, да, какая-то в чем-то, что ты не смог себя найти. И помимо этого, если у тебя еще нет какой-то внутренней поддержки в твоей семье, то как бы это все и приводит к тому, что люди расходятся. И оба, наверное, остаются в какой-то такой дизморали оба. Да, в какой-то, наверное, все равно внутренней депрессии. Короче, и как же избежать этого всего, наверное, главный вопрос. Тут, наверное, несколько вариантов. В наше время, наверное, это наверное, не опускать руки никогда, в первую очередь. Если взять со стороны мужчины, да, то в наше время, наверное, главное не то, типа, сколько он зарабатывает, а главное, чтобы, наверное, не опускать руки. Потому что работа примерно плюс-минус вся одинаковая. Плюс-минус везде она одинаково оплачивается. Да, но хотеть и стараться чего-то большего и не опускать руки, наверное, это одно из самых главных вещей. Да, стараться и хотеть чего-то большего. И тут вступает, наверное, вот это вот как раз таки еще и семейная поддержка, да, любовь, нежность, да, какая-то, поддержка словесная. И это, наверное, все сохраняет в тебе мотивацию к стремлению, к жизни, к желанию добиться чего-то большего. Можно не хотеть ничего на самом деле, да, устроиться в какую-то организацию, зарабатывать 100 тысяч рублей, но тебе этих денег явно не будет хватать. И в оконцове ты опять-таки поймаешь, наверное, эту дезмораль. Потому что все оно по кругу крутится. И потом люди на СВО уходят, умирают за 5-7 миллионов рублей. И я не думаю, что это кого-то осчастливит. Ну, во всяком случае, данного человека точно это не осчастливит. Говоря именно о поддержке, что значит поддержка? Как она выглядит, поддержка эта семейная? Наверное, у каждого это, наверное, по-разному немного. В любом случае, каждому человеку нужны какие-то разные вещи от другого человека. Да? Всегда же отношения — это взаимный обмен чем-то. Да? И когда люди от друг друга этот взаимный обмен получают, будь то, это могут быть разные вещи.